Hello, welcome to another dive in About 5. This one is on 3rd grades rounding. My name is Brittany.
And I'm Kim.
Let's get started.
Our first task, you're going to take a look at the 3 different number lines that you see and think about what do you notice, what do you wonder, and maybe what are some of the differences or similarities between the different number lines that you see. Work together as a team, pause the video, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. So I hope you had some good conversations. What are some things that you think they might have noticed?
Oh, I definitely see some differences between each of the number lines. It seems that the level of support is being taken away with each number line succession. It looks like in the very first one, the number lines that are given on the screen is the endpoints are given as well as the midpoint. Then the midpoint is taken away for the second number line, and then that level of support is completely taken away for the third number line, where the students have to give the endpoints and find the midpoints before starting to round.
Absolutely. So when we first bring in rounding, they may have more of a support like in that first number line. Maybe they haven't figured out how to create those benchmarks or how to find the midpoint. So I would start more with that heavy support and then let go a little bit more as the students progress.
I like this task because it's differentiated by levels, and depending on where the students are at in their learning, we can give them those different number lines if needed. So let's talk a little bit about the progression with our best benchmarks. This is an odd year because I know it's our first year with those best benchmarks. So the 3rd graders that are coming into you right now won't have prior rounding experience. But in the coming years, when students have experienced best benchmarks in 2nd grade, they will have already rounded to the nearest 10. They'll have a foundation for you then when going into 3rd grade, when you're required to round from 0 to 1,000 to the nearest 10 or 100. You're laying the foundation in 3rd grade for what's to come in 4th and 5th when they're rounding whole numbers and even rounding decimals in the future.
So when introducing number lines to your students, we are going to start with that concrete and even a little bit of that representational model. Number lines is a great strategy option that can help students build conceptual understanding of rounding in a linear way. Remember, levels of differentiated can be revealed by the student by discussing the endpoints and midpoints if needed.
Here's a pro tip for connecting place value with rounding. Students must use their knowledge of place value to understand rounding. 3rd graders may have previous knowledge with representing numbers on a place value chart with place value discs. We could use this knowledge to help them round concretely. If we want to round the number 371 to the nearest 100, is it easier to fill the tens place with more tens and then trade it in to make 4 hundreds? Or is it easier to clear the tens place tens frame to stay at 300s? This is a more concrete way of representing numbers and then rounding them based on what's seen.
Notice how Brittany asked those questions too. She didn't tell them, well, it's easier to fill the tens to get 100, or it's easier to clear the tens to stay at 300. She actually asked those questions, which then furthers our students' thinking as well. So a misconception that comes with rounding is students thinking that when a number is rounded down, the place value digit is lower to the previous 10 or 100. So for example, 24 rounds down to 10. If you see this, have your students represent numbers on a number line to show the different endpoints and which endpoint the number is closer to. That way they can see this number lies right in the middle or right between this endpoint and this endpoint, so I know I have to pick one of those to either round up or round down.
Another misconception students might have is if a teacher is teaching tricks that may confuse students when learning about rounding. I know it might be fun to do a rounding rap or a saying like 5 or more raise the score, but it may not translate to concrete understanding of what rounding is. For example, it might create a misconception like rounding 105 to the nearest 10 rounds up to 110, but rounding 105 to the nearest 100 rounds down to 100. So if you see a 5, that doesn't automatically mean you round up. If you see this, make sure you go back to number lines and find a strategy that works reliably so that students can understand why we round and how we round.
To summarize some strategies and models that we've been working with for concrete, we could use those place value charts, and we could go back to using place value discs or any kind of manipulative that we can represent the number. We can use more representational thinking with using our number lines, labeling those endpoints and midpoint, and finding where a number lies on that number line. Or we could go more abstract thinking and even go more in depth into the content that we're learning about and do higher level questions such as solving riddles like you saw at the beginning, or even having students label the number lines themselves. Remember, it's not a race to the abstract. Rather, we are connecting the bridges between these different types of thinking and different representations. Students can be fluid with how they are seen and showing their different strategies as well.
Thanks for watching another Math Dive in About 5. This one was on 3rd grade rounding. See you next time.